Ed Bernstein Show. Now, here's Ed.
Hi, welcome to our show. Look, I have a guest on our show today. You know, this is our show started in 1989. So this is now 34 years we've been on the show. Shelley Berkley has been on a number of times. Yes. I think initially you were probably like on the Board of Regents.
In '89, yes, I was.
When the first time that you were a guest on the show, right? Mm-hmm. Subsequent to that, you ended up in Congress for a number of terms. Each one of those terms, you would come in and talk about all the great things you're doing for Las Vegas. Then you ran for the Senate unsuccessfully, like me.
Another thing we have in common.
Yeah. And then, you know, you got this amazing job at a medical school where you're responsible for helping get more doctors in Las Vegas.
We are educating the next generation of healthcare providers for the state of Nevada. It is a very purposeful thing that we're doing at Touro, and I'm very, very proud of it. And a little number that I think demonstrates what I'm talking about, we had 4,200 applications for 180 slots in the med school last year, 2,400 applications for 80 slots in our physician assistant program. And of course, we have our physical therapy doctorate, occupational therapy doctorate, a nurse practitioner program, and the common theme in each of these programs is that they're desperately needed professions that we don't have enough people working in here in the state of Nevada. So if we can't bring them in, we're going to educate our own, and that's exactly what we're doing. I'm very proud of it.
That's wonderful news. Now, is that indicative of what's going on around the country, or is that just tip only to Touro is seeing these kind of numbers?
I can't speak for the rest of the country, but I know for the two schools, because I run two Touros, the one here and the one in Northern California. Both of them are doing very well when it comes to applications and accepting. When you have that many applications, you can afford to be very choosy about who you admit into your program. So if we admit you into Touro, we expect you to graduate because you have got everything it takes. Now, there's a lot of challenges right now with COVID. We closed the school for 2 years. We went remote, and now students are back on campus. And there's a residual issue when it comes to mental health and emotional stability after being away for 2 years, and we're dealing with that as well.
I want to talk about what our problem is in Las Vegas with doctors and nurses and everybody in the medical profession. Correct me if I'm wrong here. I mean, here's the way I see it. We have a few schools, right? University has a school, Touro has a school, Rosemont. I mean,
and there's Reno.
Reno, right? There's some schools. So getting an education is one component.
Yes.
Once you then get the education, you have to do some sort of internship or residency.
It's a 3-year residency. Graduate medical education, that's what it's called.
Okay. So then you go to like a hospital.
Right,
and go work. And a lot of students go to hospitals all over the world, right? So doctors, it's my understanding, tend to stay in places where they did their residency.
That is correct.
So for us to really be successful in getting more doctors, more nurses, we have to have better residency programs that keep our doctors here in Southern Nevada. Is that correct?
You have hit the nail on the head. This goes way back 20, 30 years, probably more than 20 or 30 years, when they put a limit, Congress put a limit on creating new residency programs. It's funded out of Medicare. If you were east of the Mississippi, then there were plenty of residency programs because they were already created. But they barred the creation of new programs, which if you're west of the Mississippi in growth states like Nevada or California, there was no federal dollars out of Medicare to pay for creating a residency
Why would
program.
they do that?
Because they were trying to shore up the budget and, limit spending. And the way they did that back in those days, it was during Newt Gingrich's speakership, was to limit the number of residency programs that can be created. It's created havoc for states like Nevada that are so growth driven. But I have to say, when Brian Sandoval was governor and continued with Governor Sisolak and hopefully with Governor Lombardo, the legislature recognizes the problem, knows if we can't get federal dollars out of Medicare to create residency programs, we have to do it ourselves. And that's what we've been doing for ever since Brian Sandoval was governor. He understood this, and 70% of doctors end up practicing where they do their residency. If we have an adequate number of residency programs in Nevada, they're going to stay. And if we don't have, and as I always tell people, we do not have a medical student shortage in the state of Nevada, because you're quite right. When you start, we are educating, or we're accepting 180 students. UNLV is 60 and has a goal to go to 120. Up in Reno, another 60-something. And so if we can keep these medical school graduates here in Nevada, we're going to be just fine. Now, we graduated 172 doctors, future doctors last year. 55 of them stayed in Nevada. That is a big and growing number, and I'm hoping if we had enough residency programs, and the right kind, because it's not only a residency program. If you want to be a cardiologist, you have to take a very specific residency program. And so it not only has to be the numbers, but it has to be a diversified type of residency to keep people here.
So has the federal law changed in how they distribute the Medicare money for east and western parts of the country?
What I found absolutely incredibly appalling, and I was in Congress at the time, when we were doing the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, another woman on the Ways and Means Committee, another congresswoman whose husband was a cardiologist, my husband's a nephrologist, we introduced legislation to increase the number of or provide the funding to increase the number of residencies nationwide. If we were talking about increasing access to affordable health care for another 20, 30 million Americans, who's going to treat these people?
Right.
And so we put that, it passed in the House bill. But if you recall, Eddie, and this is very technical stuff, it was the Senate bill that ultimately became Obamacare. The Senate bill did not have funding for graduate medical education. So here we are treating another 20, 30 million Americans and giving them access to affordable health care. And we don't have the doctors trained to do the actual treatment. And so I think that was very short-sighted and a mistake in Congress. But hopefully the states will be remedying it. And quite frankly, I'm very proud of the state of Nevada to recognize the issue and provide funding to remedy the situation.
It's amazing to me that we're in this predicament. Look, the number one complaint I hear about physicians, and I hear a lot, people calling my office are unhappy with some medical care.
And you should get my phone calls.
Yeah, I'm sure you get them all day long. But what's the number one complaint? I called the doctor, can't get in for 3 months.
Yes.
Now, what the heck?
Yeah.
You can't get in to see a doctor for 3 months.
Yeah.
That means, okay, there must be a shortage of doctors.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So,
and
the federal government,
yeah.
Why not allocate more money for these residency programs and get these doctors up and running to handle the issue.
One would think that's pretty basic thinking. Yes, I agree with you. And look, my husband is a doctor and my stepdaughter is a doctor in town, practicing in town. It takes, well, Larry, of course, I get to see every day, but Stephanie is my primary care physician. I do not waltz in there and see my doctor. I have to wait like everybody else. And if we had more doctors here, especially what's the biggest shortage? Primary care physicians. And that's another thing that I'm very proud of Touro. Over 60% of our graduates end up going into primary care. And that is the number one need, not only in the state of Nevada, but throughout the United States.
Look, I want to get to talk about your political future, but I'm not finished with the doctor thing
No,
yet.
this is what I do.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm with Touro, contracted with Touro. I'm still doing my job until June 30th. So this is something that I eat and sleep and breathe.
The other issue, and you kind of alluded to it, this mental health stuff.
It's a biggie.
You know, it used to be. You know, if you had an issue, a mental issue, you went to see a psychiatrist, right? The psychiatrist would talk to you, do some therapy. If you needed some medication, then as a last resort, they'd be able to prescribe medication. Psychiatrists don't do that anymore. They don't do therapy, right? All they do is prescribe drugs.
Well, it is an easier alternative. Look, I see it with our students, and I know that Touro is not unique. There's a lot of stressors on these students. They are under a lot of pressure. Of course, COVID did not help. There was a lot of isolation, and we're all social animals. And so I think the increased number of people that have mental challenges is going up, and the number of psychiatrists are not. And so the easiest way to treat your patient is to medicate them. Is that something that I subscribe to and think is a good idea? No, I don't. But that's what the reality is. It's the volumes of people that are really having a hard time right now dealing with a whole lot of issues, home issues, professional issues, work issues. It's a tough time for a lot of people.
And doctors, you talk about how COVID affected the students. We had a lot of doctors retire during COVID. We lost a lot of doctors.
Look, Larry is my husband is in his 70s. He did not go into the hospital during COVID. I mean, he's just at in a high risk population.
But one of the most knowledgeable.
Yes,
of
he has been
doctors
doing this a long time.
I mean, doctors who have been doing it long have the most experience.
Yes. And I was in the doctor's lounge, a couple of years ago, and a number of us were standing around talking. I can't remember which hospital it was, but I looked around, and all of the doctors that I was talking to, and I know quite well, are all in their 70s. I mean, and if they start if even more of them start retiring, they're all still practicing, but once they retire, we're going to be in a world of hurt. And that's why these local medical schools, and again, Touro is the largest, but the more students that we can educate and the more that we can keep in Nevada with increased residency programs, the better off all of us as citizens of this great state are going to be.
Look, the number one complaint of patients is they can't get in to see a doctor.
That is correct.
Number one complaint I hear from physicians is they don't get paid enough from insurance companies and Medicare.
And Medicaid is a joke.
So they have to see a volume of patients and rush them in and rush them out.
And let me tell you another issue that is affected by that. In medical school, the first 2 years you're in the classroom. Students are on campus, or during COVID they were learning remotely, but nonetheless, the third and fourth year students are out. They're working in doctors' offices. They're working in hospitals. That's where they're getting their hands-on training. Because the doctors in town have such a high volume of patients, they're not thrilled about taking students to help train. Why? Slows them down a little bit, because they have to explain what they're doing. I'm examining this patient because they're having heart palpitations, and you're taking time with the student to educate them and transfer your knowledge to them. Because the doctors are seeing so many patients every day, they're loath to take students under their wings. If they don't take students under their wings, where's the next generation of healthcare professionals coming from? These students absolutely have to be trained by their fellow doctors. And it's been a problem, I know, for us, finding rotation sites for our students. Now, we're handling it, but it's not easy.
Okay, Governor Lombardo, you're here listening to what Shelley is saying. Follow
I hope so.
Follow the map that Brian Sandoval and Steve Sisolak have given us in the state.
Yes, thank you for that. That's going to be very important. And I speak to legislators all day long and have spoken with Governor Lombardo about the need for this. I believe they understand it and understand if we're going to do the right thing by our fellow citizens, we better get more doctors in town. And we can do it. We can do it ourselves with the right amount of residency programs. And again, not only numbers, but type of specialties, and it costs a lot of money. The question, I guess, comes: well, why don't the hospitals, start the residency programs? It costs a lot of money to do it. Eventually, it's self-sustaining because the doctors that are in their residencies doing their graduate medical education, the hospitals can bill Medicare for their services, not at the same rate as a doctor, but certainly can get reimbursed for their services. But you gotta have that initial investment, and it's very costly.
Yeah, and there's ways to make it better. I mean, I've watched firsthand, like for instance, NYU Medical School and Hospital. NYU got a very generous donor who has paid for the tuition for all their medical students at NYU.
Oh my, that is
so it's free.
That is good.
So they leave with no student debt. Right? So that in and of itself is okay. Now I can afford to be a doctor, right? So, and also they've taken each one of their departments and have really focused on improving it. So now you have, they've surpassed Cleveland Clinic in a couple things, and Mayo Clinic. I mean, and NYU, I think, is number 2 or number 3 in the country now, Langone, NYU.
That's very impressive.
So there's ways to improve the care as well. So it's not all pessimistic.
Absolutely not. I mean, we can't think pessimistically about this. We have to solve this issue, and we know how to do it. But one of the things that the idea of paying the tuition is so important. So many of these students, they are saddled when they graduate after 4 years. They have well over a $200,000 debt. They're at a time that they're doing their residencies, they're getting married, they're having children, they're establishing their own practices, and they're, in addition to that, saddled with an enormous debt. And I think that stresses out people as well. We have to do better with reimbursement for our doctors, and so that they don't have to see 20, 30 patients a day. And look, I'm living it. My husband is a doctor. My stepdaughter, she's a wonderful doctor, and she would like to take more patients. There aren't enough hours to the day. And every now and then somebody calls me and says, can you please call Stephanie and see if I can get in to see her? I'm looking for a primary care physician. So this is my stepdaughter. I call Stephanie, a woman I went to high school with just called me, and she really needs a primary care physician. And she said, look, she could see my PA, she could see my nurse practitioner, but I don't have a slot for anybody, and I've got a waiting list if one of my patients cancel. And I thought, oh my goodness, and I've got big juice at my house, and I still can't get an appointment.
And you could take these issues and these problems, and they will flow down. We could talk about dentists, we could talk about physical therapists, nurses.
Nurses. And look, COVID did a number on our nurses. And we have a nurse practitioner program, so you have to be a practicing nurse before you can get into the nurse practitioner program. What's the difference
between nurse practitioner, PA, RN? What's the difference?
They're all different. I mean, look, they're all healthcare providers,
right,
but they all have different. A physician assistant is exactly that, a physician assistant. Now, so many people tell me that they'd rather see their PA than their doctor. They feel more comfortable with the PA. PA spends more time with them because, again, the doctors have to grind out the patients. So they can do everything, but they must be under physician supervision. And there's a big movement in that discipline to ease up the supervision. You know, I'm well trained. I have a 3-year degree, not a 4-year degree, for most situations that people go to the doctor's office for. I can handle that. I don't need to be supervised by a doctor. Nurse practitioners are in a somewhat better position because they don't need to be supervised by a doctor, and they could write prescriptions. And so a lot of people prefer to go see a nurse practitioner because they know that they can get the care that they need, and if they need a prescription, that the nurse practitioner can write it. Now, why that is in Nevada state law, I do not know, but I do know that it would ease some of the crunch we have in healthcare if PAs would get perhaps a little less supervision, or a doctor could supervise more PAs rather than, I think it's 3 or 5 right now, and that the PA could write a prescription. Basic stuff. I'm not talking about doing brain surgery, but I'm talking about in-office seeing patients. The physician assistants are quite capable to do that. The other disciplines, of course, huge shortage, occupational therapists, physical therapists, and the need is dramatic. When my dad and you knew my dad, when my dad was sick, and in and out of the hospital, end-of-life care. The one person he looked forward to is the physical therapist coming either to the hospital room or to his home and working with him for physical therapy. He felt that it was making him healthier and stronger. And so I know there's a tremendous need for those disciplines as well.
Yeah, and once again, graduate from school in physical therapy, immensely expensive.
Yes, it is.
And look,
not as much as doctors, but they
don't make as much as. I mean, the
that's
physical
correct.
therapists are what? You start out, you're
Correct.
making $40,000
I
a year,
I think
right?
they're doing better. I know
Oh, right.
PAs are almost 6 figures now.
Okay.
Yeah, they're doing well because the need is so great, and because there's such tremendous shortage. You know, it's supply and demand. If you need to get hired, you're going to get paid and compensated for your service, and especially in the healthcare profession, and especially with our nurses, we don't take in entry-level nurses. So for the 2-year associate degree, you have to be a nurse, and you have to be practicing for at least a year. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the hospitals are paying the tuition of their nurses in order to get the advanced degree. And so we have partnerships with a number of hospitals in town that are that want their nurses to get additional training.
Okay. Let's move on to the breaking news.
Oh, the breaking news. The tease.
You've lived in Las Vegas, in the city, for quite a while now.
About 60 years.
You have represented, education in the Board of Regents. You've represented the state in the Assembly for a number of years, your different districts. You've represented the area of Southern Nevada as a Congresswoman. Most people seem to get fed up with politics.
I know.
But you are thinking, or have you made a decision about running for mayor of Las Vegas?
I did make the decision, and I thought about it for quite a while before I did. I love public service. You know I do. And I just realized that I have so much more to give, and there's so much more to do. And as much as I've loved Touro University, and I have, I realized that it was time for me to do what my passion is. And with my background and experience, when I first started, I pretended to know what I was doing. So 40 years ago, when I was in the Nevada State Assembly, I tried very hard to look like an assemblywoman. Now I actually know what I'm doing, and it seems that with all the experience and the background and the knowledge that I have now acquired over the last 40 years of public service, I could put to good use serving the people of the city of Las Vegas. And when I talk about public service, and I don't know if your viewers know, but we know each other very well for an extended period of time. Public service to me is you serve the public, not the other way around. And so I'm familiar with all the the issues that are confronting the city. I think it's going to be, quite a new era. I mean, after all, the Goodmans, who I've known forever as well, have done good public service for 25 years. And now we're going to turn a corner. I really appreciate everything they've done for the city, and I'd like to continue that tradition. And so for all of those reasons, I decided to do it. Obviously, my kids are out of the house now.
So you have more time.
Have a little bit more time. My husband's very supportive of this, and he knows that this is just a passion. I believe in public service. It's the price you pay for the space you occupy, and I think it's an important thing for all citizens to be involved in.
And I like the fact that you came, after you did your political service, public service there, then you went to work for a company where you were really handling a lot of different, whether it was educational component, business component, was HR component, small business component, large business component.
I know how to run a company.
But I wanted to ask you about the election, because a couple of years ago they changed the time. The city elections used to be held in the spring,
right?
In the off year, municipal, yeah. This last election, they had moved it, and it was in November.
Yes.
Right, which I suspect results in a much larger turnout. How does that affect? And this year, this upcoming election will be a presidential election also. So depending on who runs for president, it may be quite controversial.
Well, luckily, this is a nonpartisan race, and I'm excited about that.
We have 1 minute left.
Okay. All right. Very, very quickly. It is quite different. You've identified that. This is the first time that municipal races, mayor race, is going to be in a presidential year in November. The costs of running are going to go up. The competition for time and
can't get on TV. All the other commercials. It's going to be very
challenging. Yeah. And look, everybody running, and there's going to be tons of people running for this office. I have no illusions that there's an easy path to victory. But I've been doing this a long time, and I think that I can handle the election well. And I look forward to serving my fellow citizens. It's quite a thrill to do that.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed.
Maybe one day I'll be calling you Mayor Shelley Berkley instead of Congresswoman Shelley Berkley
and
Assemblywoman Shelley Berkley.
I'm giving you a key to the city. How's that?
Oh, hey.
You've earned it.
Look, can I use it remotely? We'll see you next week.
When sorry is not enough. Enough said. Call Ed. EdBernstein.com.